I don't really know how to start shows.
Come on now, don't start liking me now.
So yeah, I'm funny compared to, well, you'll see later. I stand for mayhem! I know a lot of fucking idiots who think a lot of shit is mean-spirited just because it goes against what they believe. But the relief of comedy is it takes things that aren't funny and it allows us to laugh about them for an hour.
We got a purple suit to buy and a gigantic coffin.
Why are you laughing?
Evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Why Are You Laughing, a history of comedy podcast. And today, I am pleased to introduce to you Bill Hicks, probably the most requested episode that we've had.
Easily.
And he's a guy, I always say, this guy is overrated or underrated. We talk about a lot of underrated guys. I feel like Bill Hicks is a rare guy that now, years after his death, is pretty properly rated. Because I think he has a lot of respect among people who are really into comedy and really know it. And I think that's all he ever wanted. I think he wanted to kind of remain on the fringes. He was never supposed to be mainstream, and he's not. If you ask the average person, they probably don't know who Bill Hicks is or have some, vague idea of who he was. So he's a rare guy that I think kind of wound up being properly rated. Because when a lot of guys, when they die young, the reason we know them, like when we broke down Freddie Prinze, I think the reason we still know Freddie Prinze's name today is because he died young. His material was not cutting edge or anything. Whereas with Bill Hicks, I don't think it's the case. I think he kind of, earned everything that was attributed to his name. But we'll get into it. But first, I want to tell you guys, go to blindmike.net, for goodness sake. That's where you can find the Patreon link, as well as our merch. Or if you just want to support the show for free, you can do that Apple, Spotify. Who knows if you'll hear it on Spotify? You're rolling the dice, but we'll try. And YouTube as well. Get those YouTube numbers up. 5-star reviews and subscribing and all of that. Help the algorithm, supposedly. And if you do want to join the Patreon, just know you got bonus episodes, baby. The latest one is the Pelican Brief, Howard Stern's meeting. And Carl from Who Are These Podcasts joins me and Craig for that episode. It was a fun one. Also, Joe Matarese. We're going to do a bunch of weird episodes like that. So if you want to get on the Patreon, please do. There'll be a bunch of Why You Laughing content. And I'm doing like mini episodes. Like I reviewed Santino's special the other day. And I plan on reviewing every big special that comes out this year. So if that appeals to you at all, like if you liked the end of the year episode, then get on the Patreon. All right. Craig was saying to me before the show, you're not too familiar with Bill Hicks, and I think that's fairly common. I think even people, I'll go back and listen to a lot of guys, and I know, the sort of the legacy of Bill Hicks and what he's all about, but I didn't know a ton of his material before going through a lot of it for this show. So I guess in that way, you could say he's underrated. But if you look at his career and his material, I think he's a guy who wanted to remain on the fringes. And I think if you're talking influence, he's clearly cut from the same mold. I think he even says in one of the interviews we play, Mort Saul and Lenny Bruce, he's cut from that mold. And every generation before him kind of had a Bill Hicks. And I was trying to think of who this generation's would be. And I was like, well, maybe the line is stopped. Because Doug Stanhope would be the closest we have to a Bill Hicks right now, I think.
Yeah, but he might be too old to be like this generation.
That's what I'm saying. But younger than Stanhope, I don't know who it would be. So, let me know on Twitter or something. Throw some ideas out. Tim Dillon, maybe, but not really.
Kind of. He tackles the same sort
of issues.
Yeah, but he doesn't it doesn't feel the same. Like he's not like out to get the man or something,
Right. Right. Yeah. There's a very, very, there's a cynical side to all the guys we'll probably mention today, but there's an ultra cynical side to Bill Hicks. And borderline conspiratorial, not Alex Jones level, which who knows, they might be the same guy, supposedly. But I see a lot of similarities to Kinison, and we'll get into why in a few minutes. But we'll start with kind of his early life. He grew up religious, as most people did in Texas back in the day. And so he came from a very religious family. And it seemed like he had a decent relationship with his parents, but they were kind of adversarial because he would argue with his father about religion and things. and he would tell stories of how his mother would basically deny. Like he would be on stage telling these stories, and she'd be like, "Oh, you never did that. You never did that." Like she was in denial that her son wasn't a good Christian boy.
Right.
So let's get into the clips here.
You were doing a comedy at the age of 13.
Right.
Right?
Right.
What was your material then? Because your stuff, like on here, it says parental advisory, explicit lyrics. Were you telling what kind of jokes when you were 13?
Well, when I was 13 years old, I was really influenced by Woody Allen, and I would do material like him just to be able to perform. And I would do material like that. You know, I remember the first joke I wrote, in fact, was about my girlfriend leaving me because I got sexy with her, you know, and I said I blew into her ear and her head expanded and she floated away. It was like that, you know, cute, and that lasted a little while before I found me. Relentless, dangerous.
It's a dangerous kind of thing. And you also, when you would go off to the clubs, you would sneak out of the windows because your parents disapproved?
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, I was 15 years old, and the idea of going to a nightclub downtown on a school night, they didn't want to sign that note. Please let Bill go to the nightclub and hang with nefarious characters. Thanks, Dad. But yeah, I'd go up to do homework, right, and then I'd go down out the window, down the over the garage, down the gutter, and my friend would be out in the back with a car, and we'd go downtown. It's getting back in that was a little hairy.
Did they ever catch you?
Never did. They still to this day insist that didn't happen, but they're in major denial.
Pretty crazy. You'll hear guys like Chappelle and Chris Rock talk about going on stage. Pete Davidson would get on stage when they were like 16, 17, something like that, which is extremely young, obviously. But 13, it's hard to pretend at 13 that you belong in a fucking nightclub, you know?
Yeah, imagine that voice going up to like a cocktail waitress.
It's hard to pass, and it does give you some insight. And listen, I don't know. And like you said, maybe he was just doing Woody Allen material there. Who knows? But it gives you a little insight into the kind of introspective, deep guy that Bill Hicks was. The fact that he was able to do some semblance of an act at age 13. Again, I'm sure it wasn't great, but the fact that he was able to get up and do that and just even have that confidence, I think it tells you a lot about the type of guy he was.
Yeah, like, you ever break a G.I. Joe? Like what the hell is he talking about?
It's all little kid material.
Yeah. That's what
he's
I mean.
like doing a Def Jam set about his toys.
Big teachers out to get us.
So yeah, we have some clips here of his stand-up. I tried to add a little more of his stand-up than I do for a lot of guys, just because I feel like maybe some people haven't heard it. So rather than interview clips, we have clips from his stand-up of him talking about his family.
I never got along with my dad, man. When I was a kid, other kids would come up to me, "My dad can beat up your dad." I'd go, "When?" He cuts the lawn on Saturdays. Nail him out there. When he's got those Bermuda shorts, red tennis shoes, and sock garters on. Go pop him in the head with a rake.
His inflection there, and just like that, pop him in the head with a rake. It seems like such an odd thing to throw in there.
Yeah.
And that's where you see like Nick DiPaolo cites him as a big influence.
Yeah.
Which, you know, politically you wouldn't think that necessarily. But you can tell just the way he taught you, like, oh yeah, I totally get it. Like, it's just a weird word choices and inflections DiPaolo uses. There's a little Hicks in there for sure. Yeah,
we were just, I don't know if it was Why Are You Laughing or Blind Mike Project, but we were just basically talking about DiPaolo's word choice the other day.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And what you'll hear in these earlier clips where he's talking about his family, like there's definitely a shift as Hicks got, I mean, I'll use the phrase older. He died when he was 32, but as he got more, you know, established in comedy, there's definitely a shift from him being more observational and talking about his life and kind of shifting and then talking about, you know, the man and things in a more grand scheme, you know?
Yeah.
But like, I like him. I like his stand-up more than I thought I would, because, not knowing a lot of Hicks material until I'm in my 30s, I figured maybe it wouldn't hold up or anything. There's a lot of shit where, Carlin gets a lot of credit for this, where people will play his clips. There's a lot of shit where it's like, wow, this really holds up, Yeah. And it's almost like he's talking about things going on today.
Yeah, current events.
Yeah. And that another influence of his, I would say, would be Colin Quinn. Like when you hear Colin Quinn break down politics and things that are going on right now, I noticed that when I watch old episodes of Tough Crowd, where it's the same type of thing, where you're like, wow, the way Colin Quinn's breaking down this issue of, some writer getting canceled or whatever, you realize two things. A, our problems are still exactly the same. But B, like that type of material from minds like that hold up. Guys like, and that's why I put Stanhope in that category, but Colin Quinn, Kinison, Bill Hicks, Carlin, Lenny Bruce, not so much. But that's 100 years ago almost,
Right.
So guys ranting like that about society and having the kind of foresight that they do, I think manages to hold up a lot better than some other things you would hear in the 80s and early 90s. We have another stand-up clip, right?
Yep. It's more talking about his family.
Let's hear it.
Oh, boy. Remember summer vacations with your folks? Did anybody get the concept behind that? We did not get along together in a 5-bedroom house. Dad's idea was to put all of us in a car and drive through the desert in the hottest time of the year. Good call, Dad. Let's confront our tensions. Remember that? Stressful. They weren't fun. You weren't vacating. It wasn't leisure. We're going to get up at 2 a.m. I won't be on the road by 2:05. We don't have time to stop at restrooms. We're passing Dixie cups around the car. We're going to drive for 14-hour stretches in no direction whatsoever. The sun will always be shining through your window, Bill. Figure that out. I have seen the sun take turns with our car before to beam through my window. I'm in the back seat like an ant under a magnifying glass. Dad, turn the air conditioning on, please. Nope, it eats up gas. Then, Dad, you take my college money and you turn that goddamn AC on, buddy. I'm not gonna be a sunstroke mongoloid so you can save 2 cents a fucking mile.
You know what I heard in there too, oddly, is a little Reagan. The imagery of saying, I've seen the sun take turns to stay on me. Like that's Reagan type imagery. And I just keep naming guys that I think either Hicks influenced or got influence from, because I think the vast difference in comedians that I'm naming show you the level of impact that he had. Like you don't necessarily think of Hicks, Hedberg's a name that gets mentioned as a lot of people copied him. Even Reagan also. A lot of people kind of copied him or at least had his voice. You don't necessarily think of Bill Hicks in that way, but he definitely did, clearly. Like when you're listening to his act, it's very clear. Now some word for word you can see influence, which we'll get into later, but I think the influence is clear. And even like Gaffigan, you hear a little Gaffigan in there. Mm-hmm. Why is Dad always in a bad mood? Like just talking about his family and shit. So you wouldn't think guys like Reagan and Gaffigan could fall under the umbrella of Hicks babies, but they kind of do in a way.
It was so funny though. I took my kids to Disney World a couple years ago, and that was the only thing I was thinking about the whole time was Gaffigan's bit about why is Dad always in a bad mood there, because it is fucking miserable.
Well, it's good. And next episode, we'll get more into Craig's family life. But what's the next clip?
This is LSD.
Yeah. So if you ever listen to an episode of Rogan, that's another huge influence that Bill Hicks had. And this is an example. I've heard Rogan reference this joke 10 million times. So I figured I might as well throw it in because it is a great joke.
I'd like to see a positive LSD story. Would that be newsworthy? Just once? Today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slower vibration, that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There's no such thing as death. Life is only a dream, and you're the imagination of yourselves. Here's Tom with the weather.
It's funny too, is we'll talk about the Texas Outlaw comics, and you see a lot of Kinison there too. Like kind of them rubbing off on each other. Like that's very similar to the Kinison set on Letterman that we played, where he comes out and screams and is basically being a preacher, and then ends it with, "I'm not that guy." It felt a lot like that.
You know who this I can see getting a lot from this is Ron White. Sounds a lot like him in his delivery.
Sure, a lot of that's Texas too, but yeah. Ron White did say that, like, of those guys in that crew in Texas when Ron White was coming up, the one guy that was nice to him was Bill Hicks. So yeah, you're definitely right about that.
It just did the cadence there. I could hear it.
Yeah, in when we played that interview clip earlier, when he did like the imitation of someone, like his voice got a little deeper. Yeah, it sounded a lot like Ron White.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
The next clip is the Texas Outlaw comics.
Yeah, so we may have played this clip in the Kinison episode.
I think we did.
I feel like it's worth revisiting, though. Yeah,
definitely.
Because I just think this is it sets up a lot of what these two guys did. And it's interesting to hear him talk about the Texas Outlaw comics, because it sounds a lot like the old Comedy Cellar days, to where even like, he'll talk about them and he'll throw in like one guy, reference him as a hack, like one of his buddies, so it seemed like a ball busty type of place, 10 years before the Comedy Cellar got popular. And the Comedy Store didn't have that same vibe by all accounts. So I think that this is where you got a lot of that in comedy, a lot of that darkness and edge that you saw later in the 90s.
So they kicked Sam out. They kicked Sam out over and over and over again. Yeah. And finally to reach the point where Sam went across the street and crucified himself on a stop-and-go sign with diapers and a crucifix and ketchup for blood. Greenlee, I heard, called the police. I never knew Greenlee was such a concerned citizen about stop-and-go property. And the tensions rose until finally. This is all one night, basically. This is Sam's first night here.
But I mean, this crucifix.
I don't remember what night.
Okay. But this was the night he and Moore had a squabble, and he broke Moore's leg or something?
No, this is later. This is when he went back, he broke a bar stool, got kicked out for 2 weeks. Something else happened, they kicked him out forever.
Forever?
Forever.
He's been back there, though.
And Sam, yeah, he has been back. And Sam did not take that well and went up and broke Moore's leg. So that pretty much cemented the forever, at least for now.
There's an element of, like, as fans of comedy, it's like, yeah, don't back down to the man, stick up for your art. But then there's also the element of you putting yourself in the perspective of the club owner, where it's like, come on, fellas, please.
Stop it, please.
Enough.
Could you imagine trying to wrangle in Sam Kinison?
Especially back then, but I don't think Hicks was that different. Well, I think Hicks was a little less crazy and probably easier to deal with. And Hicks had a period of time where he wasn't where he was clean and sober. So he may have been a little easier to deal with. But the interesting thing about those guys, both of them, and maybe eventually money would have changed this. Like, had they both lived, they could both easily be alive now. If they were both still alive today, money would probably have an impact in their decision-making a little more, because they were both getting to the point where they would play theaters, or in Kinison's case, probably eventually arenas. I don't know if he ever played arenas while he was alive, but he certainly would be now, I would think. So I don't know. I wonder how much those guys would have changed, but at least while they were alive, they seemed very set in their principles, and they seemed like two guys that were genuinely, they practiced what they preached. It wasn't bullshit when they said they wanted to do their material, didn't want to be censored, didn't want to have it tampered with in any way, didn't want to let people tell them what to say, they were truly genuine about that in a way that I think a lot of guys fall short.
Definitely. And I mean, they were maybe not Hicks, but Kinison was destined to die young, I think.
Yeah. And when I say they lived up to their, put their money where their mouth is, for lack of a less corny term, but like sometimes to their detriment, I think. And sometimes, like I said, in a point where like if you're the guy that has to deal with them, kind of an exhausting fashion, like watching an artist like Bill Hicks, I think you're like, wow, he's really, he's an interesting guy. He has an interesting take on life. But I think if he was a guy you had to deal with every day, you'd be like, all right, Bill, we got it. Nothing's like it seems. We understand. Yeah. So that's the interesting thing. It's like, there's a very fine line between comedic genius and someone who's just ranting at you on the subway. You know what I mean? You have to not let it drive you crazy, and you have to be able to hone that into a way that like attracts an audience, so you don't just drive yourself fucking nuts,
This next clip we got is England.
He was huge in England. So we'll hear a bit of him talk about why, and then we'll get a little more into it.
Now, you said I've read somewhere as well, like you seem to like the British more than the Americans. So you kind of like a traitor, the Benedict Arnold of comedy.
I am kind of getting to be an Anglophile and to a degree, but I think the fact is you guys share a bemusement of America, which a lot of Americans don't share about themselves. So, yeah, I like coming over here a lot. You guys have a whole different thing going, I came over here the day the LA riots occurred. That was incredible. And people here were trying to sympathize. Oh, Bill, crime is horrible. It's horrible here, too. Shut up.
You should have come over in the summer for the riots over here.
Yeah, I read your crime. I read stuff in the paper like, yesterday, some hooligans knocked over a dustbin in Shaftesbury. What if they become ruffians? Doesn't sound, hooligan just doesn't sound like Crip or Blood.
You hear that DePaulo anger too coming through.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But so he was big in England, obviously, and another reason for that, like he says, he could make fun of America a lot more there than he could here. But another point he made in a different interview was, he goes, well, in London, I play theaters. Here, I'm playing the Laugh Stop this weekend. So, so that was probably part of it as well. But and it's also not really fair to be like, hey, I can make fun of a country in a place where this is a foreign country as opposed to home. You know what I mean? Like, of course, you're going to get less angry mail or less complaints after shows. But if you made fun of England, I'm sure you would start getting shit there,
Yeah, I also just love that he was like, no, I read your crime.
Hooligans. But he was big time in England. But he was big here too, because you forget, just because he was playing, smaller comedy clubs, stand-up wasn't in the 80s and 90s what it is now. And if Bill Hicks lived in a time where he had a podcast, he'd be a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not maybe we wouldn't listen to him, but he would have a huge audience, because, look at the people doing a extreme version of what Bill Hicks was doing in the 90s in podcast form. And Alex Jones is one of those guys. Are you familiar with the Alex Jones conspiracy, by the way? That Bill Hicks is Alex Jones?
Oh, no, but that's great.
Yeah. Some people believe that Bill Hicks didn't actually die. He just turned into Alex Jones.
That would be unreal. He just stopped doing his favorite thing.
Yeah. But that's the thing I think about Bill Hicks, is he wasn't an extremist in any way. I don't know that you can nail him down in any one political. I think people refer to him as like a liberal or a Democrat, but I don't know that you can nail him down to one political party. Mm. So he would be what a lot of these guys are kind of pretending to be in a more genuine way, more like Rogan. I think that's where the Rogan influence does kind of shine through, where he can have discussions like that. Like, I think Bill Hicks could have had discussions about either Trump or Biden and not get emotional in the way like Mark Maron would. you know?
Right. I think also, like, if, say, he had a podcast, that's where you'd see the most similarities between him and Tim Dillon.
Yeah. Yeah. And he would just get into topics like that, I think. But to be doing that 30 years before everyone, again, I think says a lot about how innovative Hicks was and how ahead of the curve he was. Like, now it's popular to do. Now it's not dangerous to come out and have a podcast like that. You know what I mean? Like, you might get taken off of Twitter or something, but if you find an audience, they're going to stay with you. Whereas I think in the early 90s, that was more dangerous because your only outlet was getting on television or getting on radio or whatever. And if those stations wouldn't have you, you couldn't promote your shit.
Right.
You know, so if you were a guy that was too dangerous for mainstream media, now you have other options. Back then you didn't. So back then it really meant something to be that dangerous, as his album was called. Dangerous and Relentless were his two biggest specials. And he said in, I think, like an interview on like MTV or something, he said, they go, you know, Michael Jackson has an album called Dangerous. And he goes, yeah, if you listen to me and listen to Michael Jackson, who do you think is more dangerous? But I don't know if Bill saw what was coming with Michael in the next few years.
That was also back in the day, too, when you can name specials like that and you wouldn't get shit on.
Right. Oh, that's a good point. Now it would be like, ooh, he's dangerous.
Ooh, I can't wait to have.
Oh, this guy is crazy.
My mind's going to get rocked.
That's a good point.
Next, we got Sam Morrill on Rogan.
Yeah, so I wanted to throw this in just because it's mostly Morrill talking rather than Rogan. I just find it interesting. And this gives a little better perspective than I'm able to articulate it into the kind of influence he had on today's generation.
I mean, Bill Hicks he's like the Biggie Smalls of comedy because the amount of work he did, it's gold, and he died so fucking young. He had like 5 albums, dude.
I think he died at like 34 or something like
that. Pancreatic cancer. Yeah. And you re-listen to those albums, dude. Those albums, whenever comics call Bill Hicks overrated, I'm like, you're a fucking idiot. Bill Hicks is great. And you know what's great about Bill Hicks? So many comics now with his ideology would only perform in like SF and Portland and Burlington, Vermont. That dude's he's taken that act to Alabama. That's fucking cool. Yeah. That's why he's bombing. So
he did the road constantly.
Oh, dude, the Flying Saucer tour. Yeah. When you're like, those albums, I'm dying laughing to. You're listening to one of the greatest comics of all time bombing, and he released this for us. He's fucking bombing. He's calling the crowd dumb. Yeah. And it's not like just some comic it's a great comic calling crowds dumb. There's something beautiful about that. He's so fucking angry on stage, but it was like beautiful anger. It was earned anger.
Well, I just thought that was a very good description of him. And I think it's a great point that, like, hey, you know, Patton Oswalt and Mark Maron, and I'm sure there are better examples out there, but those are just the two that come to mind as being, you know, preachers of the left of that ideology. That's great that you get that message out there, but they'll do it to their crowd. They'll do it in alt rooms. I mean, they're also big enough names that they're selling tickets to their people, but they're not doing it in places where they're going to get a lot of pushback. And Bill Hicks was. And I think that kind of goes to the point, like I was saying before, like it was more dangerous to do the type of material he was doing in 1991 versus present day. And I think the reason you hear overrated, because you will hear people say, like, I think Bill Hicks is overrated. And that's hard to say, because he's not like a household name. He's not some name that Bill Hicks is on every top 10 list. Now, he wasn't a lot of lists, like Rolling Stone had him ranked very high, and a lot of the British papers that would do, all-time comic rankings would have Bill Hicks pretty high. So he was in that discussion. But if you talk to the average person, they're not like, oh, Bill Hicks is the greatest comic ever. But yet you will still hear people call him overrated. And I think it's because the type of material he's doing, you can't just pick it up. It's hard to find just a random bit, although I guess we've done it here. Like there are a few bits that have made me laugh. But some of that like real political stuff, it's like it turns a lot of people off.
Right.
So the people that it turns off, they're like, he's overrated. I didn't find him funny. But that's not really a fair assessment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a lot of comics I mean, now he would be a mega star because that's all people want. Like, not people, I guess. Real comedy fans don't want to, but like the Portlands.
This is the thing about Hicks, and I think it's true of Kinison also. I think they would hate that. I think Bill Hicks would have changed in today's climate.
Yeah,
because what he was doing then would be so accepted now that I think he in some way would have taken kind of the opposite stance, you know?
Yeah, that's actually a good point.
Because I think he wanted to be on the fringe. And like I said, that changes a lot with people. You know, you see people that when they're young push a lot of boundaries, and then as they get they become friends with famous Howard Stern. They become friends with famous people, and they kind of like that a little more, and they like that the money's coming in, so they say things that will be more accepted.
Next we have censored on Letterman.
So this was a big thing. You can tell it really bothered him.
It bugged the shit out of him.
It really did, because you could tell he was a guy that really respected Letterman.
Yes.
So first we have the interview, yes?
Yep.
This is him talking about it?
Yep.
Yeah, so he sets up what happened pretty well.
I haven't this one because it was recently on the David Letterman show on October 9th that I did the show, taped the show at 5:30 in New York, and then at 7 p.m. was called by the producer and told that I would be excised completely from the show. I, of course, asked why. The material had been approved and reapproved by the producers. And they said that CBS had deemed the material, these are quotation marks, unsuitable for the viewing public and for the Letterman audience. And I made the point that when I'm not on the show, I'm a member of the Letterman audience. So ultimately what you're saying is my material is not suitable for me. What a predicament. So anyway, I was censored from the show, and I kind of think there's a little pride in that. I mean, a lot of people have been bleeped and burped, and but actually what happened was I did some material about pro-life people. And the joke I did was very simple. All I said was, if you're so pro-life, do me a favor, don't lock arms and block medical clinics. Lock arms and block cemeteries. Let's see how committed you are to this premise. It could even be construed as pro-life if you wanted to make that argument. Yeah. Anyway, they counted that as one of the quote-unquote hot points that I touched on. Here's the punchline. Monday night during the Letterman show, a commercial airs for pro-life.
And that's the shit that you could tell really bugged Hicks, is being commercial. And we'll play some more stuff where you can tell he really he hated it to a point where even I, a guy who likes that type of shit, even I'll go like, all right, Bill, take it easy. You know, like he really hated the industry and any sort of commercialism. And that's where you start to get into an inherent hypocrisy with any performer. Not saying Bill Hicks himself is a hypocrite, but just saying like, okay, if you thwart off all commercialism in any sense, well, then can you promote your gigs on regular radio because they have ads? You know what I mean? Like, how deep do you go down that rabbit hole? How true do you stay to those beliefs? Because at some point, if you want to get people in the club, you're gonna have to promote somewhere, you know?
Exactly.
So it's tough to really hear, but I like him sticking to his guns and kind of shitting on Letterman. We'll play a little more from that. I just thought this interview was very good. So we have more clips from this interview. And if you want to, this is just a random like overnight TV show that he did that took calls. It was like local to Houston or the Houston area. And they would take calls, and it gives you kind of a feel of what a Bill Hicks podcast might have been like, because it was on at like 2 a.m.
I do like though that the phone number to call in was just 472-CALL.
That's how local this show was. You didn't need an area code.
Exactly.
That almost makes me feel like I grabbed a clip from a fake show. 472-CALL.
Yeah, yes. It's like calling a restaurant. It's like, oh yeah, 555-7-EAT.
So what was what else was he talking about here?
This one we got not much has changed is what it's labeled.
So this is interesting. It's interesting to hear him go on this rant here because you're like, wow, that's. I mean, you want to talk about holding up? This I could have pulled a clip from 9 million podcasts where someone's saying this today.
You know, there's a lot. You know, for instance, let me just give you an example. See, what they do is they kowtow to a minority that's very vocal. Reasonable people don't write letters. Reasonable people have lives. Reasonable people know it's just a joke. Reasonable people know it's just TV. They know they can change the channel or they'll wait and something else will come on. Sure. See, reasonable people don't get it active. It's these minorities, these fundamentalists who are totally organized, and they are a minority, and who are the ones trying to set this agenda for America. And
I mean, and believe me, I'm aware that I'm guilty of it. But how many podcasts now do you hear? They're caving into the minority, the loud people on Twitter. And it's funny to hear, like, we'll say cancel culture is kind of a new thing. Like, I point to, you know, the early 2010s a lot, that kind of area. You could even say somewhere in the early 2000s. But then you'll go back and, like I said, you'll watch old episodes of Tough Crowd. You'll hear Bill Hicks complain here. There's other clips, you know, from the 80s and 90s that we've played in the past where it's like, oh, people have always been bitching. The problem is now you have such a direct line to people that you can bitch at.
Right.
You know what I mean? Whereas back in the day, if you wrote a letter, it would probably never get to them.
They'd never hear about it.
Yeah, the reference I hear Kumia use all the time is if you wrote Clark Gable back in the day, the channels you would have to go through to get that letter to him, and then you were never even sure if he got it.
Right.
You know? So, but now it's like just throw a tweet at someone and they see it.
No, but even back then, like say you're Hicks and I'm your manager, I'm going to get one of those letters and then just throw it in the trash.
Throw it away. He'll never see it.
Right.
Yeah. And if you're CBS, that probably happened a lot too, where the head of CBS wasn't getting those letters necessarily at the time. Now they see it because it's just on Twitter, and maybe it happens to be trending that day. #cancel whoever. And, you know, that company's like, hey, we might as well not do business with them. Like I've heard comedians talk a lot about, this is different than cancel culture or anything, but like when any comedian, I'm trying to think of the most recent one, but let's say when Bob Saget died, comedians, and maybe they never even had a relationship with Bob Saget, but they'll get tweets like, why haven't you reacted to Bob Saget yet? What's your stance on Bob Saget? And they're like, I didn't even know the guy. What am I supposed to put out, like RIP or something? So,
well, Nikki Glazer kind of messed it up for everyone.
And that was my fault. I messaged Nikki Glazer and I was like, why haven't you reacted to this? And then she put out a beautiful song.
Yeah.
But, you know, the way corporations react to that is much more sensitive. They worry about everything. I mean, Family Guy has the joke, the FCC episode they did. I forget exactly what it is, but it's basically, we got 10 letters about this, and every letter is 1,000 people. So 10,000 people are furious about this. And it's like, that's how corporations look at that a lot. Is like, oh, well, if a few people are angry, God knows how many didn't reach out to us. They're going to stop buying our product. So I guess the issue is it's always been that way, but now you're just hearing from them more often. And Bill Hicks was aware of that 30 years ago.
Yep. And here he is talking about the mainstream media some more.
All right.
There are venues and there are avenues, but they are not going to be mainstream. But that's why I love public access. That's why England has opened up for me, and HBO was nice enough not to edit anything except due to time constraints. And I think there's a change coming up, man. You can't put out puerile crap 24 hours because eventually there's going to be chaos in the streets, which there already is. Yeah. Because people are frustrated not having their voice of reason confirmed. And everyone has that voice of reason that goes, this is bull, man. What I'm watching is bull. And yet, the media does not confirm it. So after a while, people begin to think they're insane. And that's the bummer about it. But that's why I love non-mainstream stuff, because you actually hear honest emotions. And that's what you won't hear on mainstream TV ever, is honest emotions.
Well, I think,
I think that's pretty prophetic. And I think he was so spot on that's why you have a lot of these nuts like Alex Jones and all these conspiracy podcasts and things like that. And it's why you have people complaining, oh, there's, misinformation going around on all these podcasts. And it's like, well, that's because people are so fed up with the news and just accepting the bullshit that they throw out there that they'll go and do their podcast. And maybe some of that is also horse shit. So at the end of the day, no one's going to get everything right. But I think that's the reason you've seen this surge in podcasting, that some people will panic and say, well, it's not true. They're believing the wrong things. And it's like, well, that's because the media made us believe horse shit forever. And people just got tired of it. So I think that's such a good way to put it. And I think it was so insightful because he was spot on about how things would go. Like eventually, people got fed up with the mainstream media.
He would have flipped out during COVID.
Oh my God. Yeah, exactly. And that's what the mainstream media has done so much for podcasting, because by the way, you just got us a warning on Spotify. I never realized until a couple weeks ago, if you just say that word, they'll put the little blue label on your podcast.
Oh,
it's
really?
Crazy. Yeah. So again, to Hicks's point, that's why stuff is like that is out there, because you could watch, whether it's CNN or Fox, and see just the horse shit that they want you to see. So you're looking for other outlets. And that's why I think Bill Hicks would have been pretty great for this generation.
I would love to see it, but
well, maybe we will. Maybe he'll make a comeback someday. Who knows?
Maybe Alex Jones will lose weight and become Bill Hicks again.
He, by the way, this interview was done towards the end of his life. Like I said, he only lived to 32. We fact check Rogan. He's spreading disinformation. Rogan said he was 34. He was only 32 when he died.
I was going to say, looking at him in that interview, he looked pretty frail.
Yeah, so no one knew it, but he was going through chemotherapy at this time.
Right.
He had pancreatic cancer, which is
such a friggin'
even today,
thing.
I think it's a death sentence, more or less.
Yeah, but at that age too, on top of it, it's like, God damn.
So he was dealing with that, which probably added to his angst and bitterness, I would think. But Letterman, no one knew that at the time. I don't know. I'd be curious. It was hard to figure out a timeline. I don't know if anyone knew while he was alive that he was dying. He might have gone out like Norm, but
yeah, maybe. Next we have Letterman apologizing.
Yeah, so this was interesting. It's weird to watch Letterman here because I love Letterman so much. But then when you have that spin put on him that Hicks did here, where he was really calling him out for, Letterman was known as this guy who didn't give a fuck about the industry, and he was quirky and weird, and he was doing things that you're not necessarily supposed to do on television. And then when you hear Hicks talk about him, it's like, oh, maybe he's not really that guy. And then when you hear this segment that he did, it's a little weird because it feels like he's being more Hollywood than I remember Letterman being. And a lot of people will say at the end, Letterman was very Hollywood. Look, that's the weird thing about Letterman is like he was the anti-Hollywood guy forever. And now he literally does interviews on Netflix with Kim Kardashian unironically. And that's nothing against Kim Kardashian, but who stands for Hollywood more than her,
But he probably got paid an insane amount of money to just go talk to this person for 45 minutes.
That's exactly what I'm talking about with Hicks and Kinison. Whereas if they live for another 30 years, if someone threw enough money at them, I wonder if they would have abandoned some of the morals that they had.
What would have been their breaking point? I think Hicks wouldn't have, but I think Kinison would have caved.
It's tough. It's tough because they're both guys that could have made a living on stand-up alone. And I don't know that any network ever would have hired them. But you know what Hicks would have been good at, I think, is a weird late night show. Kind of like Dennis Miller. He was friends with Dennis Miller, and you can see a lot of similarities for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you see that Dennis Miller show on HBO, Hicks could have something like that, I think, or something like the Chris Rock show, you know,
Yeah.
where it was a late night talk show technically, but he could do his own thing.
He could have also, I could have seen him doing maybe not the same material, but like the same concept of Bill Maher or something.
Bill Maher for sure. Yeah, definitely. In fact, I would almost say Bill Maher had the career that Bill Hicks might have if he lived.
That's maybe. That's not bad.
I don't know Bill Maher's stand-up material enough to be like, oh, it's similar or different.
Mm-hmm.
But that's if Bill Hicks lived long enough, that's the type of career I have him seeing is like Bill Maher, where it is, and I think it's a perfect example because Bill Maher was the furthest left guy you could imagine for so long, and then society shifted, but Bill Maher didn't change, so now he's considered. Well, I don't basically a MAGA guy or something. I don't know what he's considered now. But
I know the COVID time period really messed with him because he said I forget where he did that interview, but he said it might have actually been his own show, but basically he saw what some people on the left were doing and was like, that's who I'm associated with. So he kind of stepped back a little.
Yeah, and so that's what I think Hicks might have been like if he had. Unfortunately, we'll never know, but. Let's hear Letterman. So Letterman brought out Bill Hicks's mom to apologize. This is, I think, 25 years after Hicks had passed. So you might say, too little, too late, Dave. But he brought his mother out to talk about this years later.
You might say that they were in a meeting and they're like, Dave, we only have enough material for 4 shows this week.
Let me drag Hicks out of his grave and.
If I haven't previously, just apologize for the heartache and sadness that my decision caused to you and your family. And of course, made all the worse by the knowledge that at the time Bill was terribly, terribly sick. And then not many people knew that, did they?
Very few.
Very few, yeah.
And I appreciate you saying that.
But it doesn't really do much. So I know he threw it away. He threw it away in that interview. He kind of gave it away. Is it worth playing the clip that is in question again, just so we have like in context how the joke played?
You want me to play the joke?
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
All right.
I mean, people. I never seen it before this, so.
Yeah, it's just good to see how the crowd reacts, even though he kind of explained it earlier.
People annoy me. You know what's really annoying me? These pro-life people. You ever look at their faces? I'm pro-life. Boy, don't they look it? They just exude joie de vivre, You see them trying to go to an orphanage and adopt a kid. We're pro-life. We're here to adopt. Kids are just, oh, don't pick me. Oh, no. I'll eat gruel, 15 to a bed, no problem. Just keep Heather's 2 mommies coming and we're fine in here. I'm pro-life. If you're really pro-life, do me a favor. Don't lock arms and block med clinics, okay? If you're so pro-life, do me a favor. Lock arms and block cemeteries, okay? Let's see how committed you are to this idea. She can't come in. She was 98. She was hit by a bus. There's options.
It's a funny premise. And what's funny about time also is that like it would be way more brave or dangerous now to come out and be anti-abortion.
Oh yeah.
Whereas 30 years ago it was the edgy thing to be pro-abortion. Like Hicks literally got kicked off television. They didn't air this entire set, by the way. It's not that they edited out that joke.
Yeah, they wiped him off the show.
They wiped him completely, and I think at that time it was maybe the only set to get completely scrubbed from Letterman for sure.
Yeah, that's what he was saying in that interview. He was like, It's kind of like a badge of honor almost.
Yeah. And, that's the interesting thing there is too, like you heard him say earlier, like, well, I was part of Letterman's audience. So you're saying it's not suitable for me. And you hear there, the audience is laughing. There weren't groans. There wasn't this shock and awe. And sometimes you'll hear that a lot. You know what I mean? Which sometimes that's good. You want to hear, people react unfavorably to your material sometimes. Right. But in this case, like they seem to enjoy it. So essentially what the executives at CBS were doing was blaming the people in that audience. And it's like, don't put that on me. I laughed at the joke. Don't say it's not suitable for me. It's not suitable for you. You didn't like it. I get to Hicks's point because of the advertising.
Well, maybe
so at the end of the day, what
if they didn't like it, and because they did this whole thing with his mom, they changed the audience noise so it wasn't like after this whole presentation.
Well, that would really be spitting on Hicks's grave.
Yeah,
because if there were groans, he would want that in there.
That's true.
But I lost my train of thought now. Well, who knows? It'll come to me later, I'm sure. And Letterman addresses it one more time after that, right?
Yeah, it's recapping.
Let's hear it.
Just great. He looks tremendous, and I've not seen that videotape or any part of it since that night, and seeing it now, it raises the question: what was the matter with me? What was I thinking? That was just tremendous. He if anything. It says a great deal about me. It says more about me as a guy than it says about Bill, because there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. Just perfect. And the fact that, and I expected it to be somewhat dated, being that old, man, it's not. It's just great. He, in fact, I guess this speaks to the suggestion that he was way ahead of his time.
So I think you can kind of shit on Letterman for that, but I do think there is an element of him taking the bullet for CBS there, and being a good company man. Because say what you want, but the little I know about Letterman, I doubt he was so outraged at that joke that he said get rid of the whole set. I think that was a CBS thing more than a Dave thing. So I think he's kind of taking the bullet there, being the bigger man and apologizing. But there's something to be said for, like, judge how much you respect it on your own. But the reason guys like Letterman and Leno and Carson are able to be in show business for 20, 30 years is because they know how to play the game. And, the reason guys like Bill Hicks was on the fringes of entertainment is because he had no interest in playing the game. And I think the best example of that is our next clip, yes?
The Leno one.
So this is, he had a reason to have a gripe with Letterman. This is just a visceral hatred of a concept of a human being. He just hates what Jay represents. And boy, do you really hear it here.
Oh, yeah.
I'm kind of bummed because I'm missing right now, even as we speak, my favorite cultural train wreck, The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. I'm like a rubbernecker, man. Every night it's the crash of fucking metal when that show starts. Me and my friends have a little office pool wondering exactly which episode and which guest is going to be on the night Jay finally puts a 9mm in his mouth and blows his Dorito shilling head off his fucking body. I think it's going to be Joey Lawrence from the show Blossom. Other my friends beg to differ and think Patrick Duffy a more likely culprit. So, hi everyone, welcome to the show. Tonight we have Joey Lawrence. Hi Joey, how are you? It's good to see you again. Boy, it was always my comedic dream to be 44 years old and interviewing a little Tony Danza wannabe every 3 months. Boy, I'm fulfilled as a human spiritually.
It's so much in there, makes me laugh, but it's funny to be like, to not just say Tony Danza, to say a Tony Danza wannabe. Someone who didn't make it to being to Tony Danza is who he's interviewing. Right. But that's visceral hatred. And he throws in Dorito shilling. He called him Dorito shilling, whatever he said. And I heard, so Leno addressed this in an interview years later. And Leno was in a Doritos commercial, essentially, is what that's about.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that Bill Hicks would like bitch about this to him, be like, how can you do, you're so corporate, how can you do? And he complained. Oh, this is the story. I'm sorry. He went to Jay first and wanted to do that set that he did on Letterman. And this is how Leno tells the story. He basically said, Bill, that's not going to get on TV. It's not me. That's just not going to get on TV. And he was like, oh, fuck you. You're corporate now, blah, blah, blah. And so he went to Letterman, and Letterman had him on. And of course, as we know now, they scrubbed the whole set. And so Jay was like, yeah, basically he looked at me as commercial in Hollywood, and he didn't like that I was doing Doritos commercials. And in his mind, I I changed because of that. That meant I had changed.
He was just right.
He was right. If that's how it played out, yes. But I think Hicks's point would be like, hey man, you came up with it. You should be fighting for us. You know what I mean? Like, you have that job, so you should be on my side. You shouldn't be telling me that it's not going to go on. You should be telling them it is going to go on, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's how Bill Hicks looked at it. And I respect the way Bill Hicks looked at it more than the way Jay looked at it. But I also have more of an understanding of the way Jay looked at it, you know?
Yeah.
And again, like I said, it's the reason Jay is, you know, a multimillionaire and has a garage full of vintage cars is because he would say like, that's not going to get on TV. You know, sorry.
The vintage cars attacked him though. They almost got him.
Yeah. Bill Hicks almost got his revenge. He lives on.
Yeah. He haunts like an old El Camino in there.
Yeah. And then Leno, of course, when I heard him explaining it, threw in, he's like, you know, I like to think we were friends when he died. And I was like, no, I don't think so. Based on that clip, I don't think so.
He said he can't wait for you to like blow your head off.
Put a gun in your mouth. Yeah. And that's the other thing about Hicks is like that rant that you just heard is pretty ballsy for a, let's say, 30-year-old guy to be going up against the Tonight Show.
And it was still very hot.
Yeah. You know, a guy who's playing clubs that probably really needs to promote those dates to go after the biggest franchise and kind of the kingmaker of comedy. I know Leno didn't carry the same weight as Carson, obviously, but that's what the Tonight Show was known as, is like, hey, if you're on the Tonight Show, you've made it as a comedian. And Bill Hicks is just saying, go fuck yourselves.
Right. Well, even when Leno started doing his late night show, the comics still made it then. The rest of the show
for sure, yeah.
Early 90s, it was still pretty effective.
Had some cachet, yeah. So yeah, I mean, like, I just came away respecting Hicks a lot more than I ever knew. Like I said earlier, he was probably our most requested subject.
No matter what, anytime even if
if I would throw it, hey, looking for some ideas, or you guys want to see Bill Hicks.
Even if you just post an episode, someone will be like, when's the episode of Bill Hicks?
When are you doing Bill Hicks? Yeah.
Here it is.
So here, I hope we did him justice. We have a little more to get to. But I did want to just say, if you guys have any ideas, I have a master list, which at the beginning of this podcast, when people would suggest things, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'll remember that. That's no problem. We'll get to that eventually. And I'm sure I've forgotten a bunch of them. So
resend.
If you've ever suggested anything to me, feel free, reach out on Twitter or message me on Patreon, and I will add it to the master list. As we have a bunch to get to still, but if you guys have any ideas, feel free to throw them out there. So I think we're ending with Leary, right?
2 more.
All right. We're obviously going to get to Dennis Leary. I didn't want to do too much of it because I feel like we did it in the joke stealing episode.
It was half the episode, yeah.
Yeah, but what's
Hedberg?
What's this one? Oh, this is just a funny clip of Hedberg. I just found it funny him talking about the final days of Bill Hicks.
Would you continue to work if you knew you were on your last legs? Would you sit down and start hammering out jokes?
That's a good question. That's what Bill Hicks did. You remember Bill Hicks?
Yes. Oh, he was a genius.
Yeah. He on his last 6 months, he was on a rampage, man. He wanted to get all that stuff out there because he had a lot of conspiracy theories too that he wanted to release. I think he was one of the first guys. What was that place down in Texas where they had the Koresh? Waco. He was one of the first guys to talk about the fact that maybe the tanks from the government were firebombing the place. So he was like hell bent on getting that stuff out. Me personally, I talk about bananas and stuff during my show, so I don't know if I was dying, if I would feel compelled to get that information out.
Such brilliant self-awareness. It's so funny. I think he's right too, by the way. I think he was like one of the first people to call out the government for Waco, Texas.
Shout out.
So yeah, that's why. Now here's the thing we haven't really diagnosed with Bill Hicks, were he alive today. He may have just gone insane.
That's true.
I think a lot of these conspiracy guys, when it's your true beliefs and it's not a business for you, I think you just go down a wormhole where it drives you fucking nuts.
You go crazy.
We'd be like, remember Bill Hicks was funny and now he's just ranting at people on the on the freeway?
Yeah.
Yeah. So who knows? But I just thought that was a funny throwaway by Hedberg. So yeah, we're pretty much done with like the life retrospection on Bill Hicks, because he didn't do a lot. I mean, he had a bunch of material out there, but like that's all he was known for was stand up.
He was younger than me when he died.
Yeah, unfortunately. But the main thing I think you hear Bill Hicks's name mentioned with now, unfortunately, is joke theft, and no fault of Bill Hicks, but it might be the most egregious example of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, go back and listen to the joke stealing episode. We played a lot more there.
Great episode. I love that one.
So, and in that episode, like me and Craig have very different philosophies on it. And mine is basically, we've talked about it a bunch, but essentially I don't think joke stealing is nearly as rampant as people call it out for. I think a lot of what people call joke stealing is ultimately parallel thinking, or even just forgetting you've heard someone do this material and you having a similar thought.
Mm-hmm.
But I consider joke stealing, like Mencia would be my best example of a joke thief.
Second best. We're about to show the best.
Second best. Because he would literally sit in the back of the room with a notepad and write down people's jokes and with the intention of repurposing them. I look at joke stealing more as when you have real intent, real malice. The other things I would say are manslaughter. Guys like Mencia and Dennis Leary, it's murder one. And I just played one example. Like I said, there's a bunch out there. I just figured, why do the whole thing again? But this is just a quick example of the Leary-Hicks similarities.
I'm looking forward to cancer, man. But I don't want that bone cancer or that stomach cancer. I want that throat cancer. That's the best kind. You know why? Because when you get the throat cancer after the first operation, they give you that voice box thing. Know what I'm talking about? The thing that makes you talk like this.
That is my big fear in life, doing smoking jokes in my act, then showing up 5 years from now. Good evening, everybody. Remember me? I was wrong.
I mean, Hicks's was funnier, but there's even down to, we broke it all down, but down to the referent Yul Brynner and Keith Richards, like the names he uses are the same.
The one we just showed was maybe the least egregious of them all.
Yes, probably. The other one were just too long. I figured that was the best clip to play, but the others are so long.
Mm-hmm.
But at least with like Mencia, he would change the references to have like relevant Mexican subject matter.
Right.
And he would change the names and things like he was smart about his crimes, Mencia was a respectable criminal. You're like, the guy, son of a bitch, almost got away with it.
He tried to get away with it. This dude is the Brian Walsh of comic theft.
Yeah. And so if you're not familiar with Dennis Leary's No Cure for Cancer, I've heard like a lot of people will cite that as one of their favorite comedy albums, which is weird because very few people cite Dennis Leary as their favorite comedian. But No Cure for Cancer gets mentioned in that, elite category. And you wonder, well, why would he only have one album like that? And the answer is because Bill Hicks died. And at the end of Hicks's life, like him and Dennis Leary were friends. And like they came up together in comedy, and that's what really hurt Hicks. And he would throw jokes out about Dennis Leary's material. He addressed it pseudo directly. Like he didn't do a full on interview about Dennis Leary stealing his stuff, but he gave answers to things where you were pretty clear his stance on whether or not Dennis Leary ripped him off. But what I would suggest is there's no gray area. Maybe if you heard the joke we just played, you'd be like, okay, maybe parallel thinking. There's 4,000 examples. From No Cure for Cancer. It's almost a word for word ripoff. It's mind boggling that he got away with that. I mean, he wouldn't have in the age of the internet.
I'm hoping that the clip we just played is us being basically like Elliot and E.T. dropping Reese Pieces, getting you guys to go look into this.
Yeah. Mike and Craig are wrong. And then you'll stumble upon just a gold mine of information.
This is like literally, that's the only joke that I'm like, maybe he, is similar. The rest, it's like, so the other comics will steal jokes. This was like a whole album theft.
He was stealing the specific references,
yes,
which is to me the most egregious thing.
Yes.
But yeah, if you're a Dennis Leary fan out there, just know you're really a Bill Hicks fan.
Just know you're wrong.
Yeah. Maybe Bill Hicks talked about one day having a show about firefighters. It'll be on cable. I think it's going to be edgier than network.
It's going to be called Rescue Me with an exclamation mark. Leary got rid of the exclamation mark.
Yeah. No one will notice. But you know what? I guess to Leary's credit, he pivoted more towards acting.
Yeah.
I think he kind of knew without Bill doing his writing, his stand-up days were numbered. But again, that just shows you the brilliance of Bill Hicks. He had people directly rip him off. He has such great influence in comedy, and that's the main thing I noticed. Like, not being a Bill Hicks fan when I grew up, but now going back and watching his stand-up, you're like, damn. It's all like, there's a list of guys I would be like, oh, Bill Hicks was ripping all these guys off if I didn't realize he came first.
Right. Exactly.
So shout out to Bill Hicks, rest in peace. But like I said, ultimately, you heard Morrill talk about him. Guys mentioning him as overrated. A lot of guys will also say he's underrated, which in my mind makes him maybe the most perfectly rated guy in comedy. And I think his legacy is exactly what he would have wanted it to be, where there's a lot of people who really respect him and get what he was doing. And there's a lot of people who have no fucking idea who he was.
Yeah.
And couldn't care less about him. And that seems like the type of guy he was, that he would have wanted it that way. So,
like we were talking about the coaching tree earlier. We didn't even bring up Leary. Like, oh yeah.
Well, I knew we were getting to it. Yeah, that's yeah.
No. Yeah, maybe you probably were like, yeah, we're gonna talk about that later. I'm not gonna bring it up. I completely spaced it. I was like, thinking of it. I'm like, seriously, who would that be?
Yeah. So for the next, like I said, for your suggestions, guys, for the next few weeks, I was thinking maybe Steve Martin or Mel Brooks, go back in time a little further than we've gone the last couple of weeks.
Steve Martin,
but we'll see.
I love the idea of Steve Martin.
And if you want bonus episodes, like the Pelican Brief episode that we did, like Joe Matarese Part 2, not sure what the next bonus episode will be, but it will be kind of in the same vein, a more obscure episode like that. If that interests you, subscribe to the Patreon. And the easiest way to find that is going to blindmike.net. And it's easiest because it's where you can find all the free links as well. If you'd rather just test us out for a while, then check us out on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. And by the way, if you're watching on YouTube and want those videos unedited, that's another reason to hop on the Patreon, as well as getting these episodes a week early. So nothing but reasons in 2023 for Why You Laughing fans to get on that Patreon. So act now, people.
Come say hi.
Yes. And verygoodshow.org. If you want to check out Craig's stuff, go listen to Very Good Show and all they've got going on over there.
Yeah, so much going on.
What a salesman. All right, guys. We'll talk to you guys next week on Why Are You Laughing?